Hello YouTube, welcome back to my channel, and in this short video I'll be comparing the two budget offerings from Motorola. On your left you have the Moto G second generation from 2014, and on your right you have the Moto E 2015 second generation as well. Now both these phones are on a budget price. This phone will cost you around 140 to 150. Sometimes the prices vary, so you can always buy it slightly cheaper as well, whereas this phone is even cheaper than the Moto G, and this phone will cost you around 110 pounds, and the prices also sometimes fluctuate a bit up and down, but both of them are less than 150 and they're between 100 and 150, so which is not too bad. Now the question is, which one is better and which one will suit your needs more? So if you actually need a phone which has 4G LTE on a budget, then clearly Moto E should be your choice, because this phone comes with 4G LTE, whereas the Moto G 2014 from last year, this comes with 3G. It has no 4G LTE, even though there's a version 4G LTE version of the Moto G released in Brazil and some other countries, but it's not as widely available as you have the Moto E. So if you're in Europe or Far East, you probably only be able to get hold of a Moto G, only the 3G version, not the LTE version. But hopefully in the next coming months it will probably be available widely around the globe. But the Moto E is the 4G LTE version. It's available all across states and Europe and Far East as well. So if you're looking for a 4G LTE offering on a budget, then you have to go with the Moto E. Also, the screen sizes is the obvious difference. The Moto E is at 4.5 small QHD screen. The reason I say small QHD is because if I say QHD, a lot of people are going to get confused. Small QHD is basically 540 by 960, whereas a proper QHD, capital Q, which is, it's 2560 by 1440. So none of these phones obviously have that resolution, but this has a 540 by 960 resolution and around, I think, 250 ppi, and this phone has 720p screen, and the ppi on this is around 270 to 280, I think, if I remember correctly. Anyway, the screen on the Moto G is obviously bigger at 5 inches, and it's also 720p, whereas the screen on the Moto E is slightly smaller at 4.5 inches, and the resolution is also slightly lower as well. But turning the Moto E on, I've got it on full brightness, as you can see here, and still it's a pleasurable experience to look at the screen, and it's not too bad. The text is crisp and clear, even though it's not as sharp. It's not, the contrast is a bit low as well, but all in all, for normal use, making phone calls and stuff, playing a few odd games here and there, emails and stuff, this phone has more than enough resolution for your needs, as compared to the Moto G now, which has a 720p screen, and this screen is obviously bigger and also more brighter. I've also got the setup at full brightness, and this screen is definitely more brighter than the one on the Moto E. And so if you fancy bigger screens and you've got bigger hands like myself, for instance, and big fat thumbs, then I would say you should go for the Moto G, because you will find it a lot easier to type on this phone, and if you also want a better resolution. So let's talk about the speakers now. The Moto G has two front-facing speakers, and they are stereo speakers. You're not going to find any phone with stereo speakers at this kind of silly cheap price, whereas the Moto E only has one front-facing speaker, and unfortunately the sound on this is not as good as on the Moto G. So if you're a music person, you like to listen to a lot of music and videos on YouTube, and you want to listen to music on your speakers, then I would suggest you should go for the Moto G 2014, which has a far better speakers than the Moto E. Also, if you are a camera person, if you like to take a lot of photos, then I would say the Moto G is the better offering, because this has 8 megapixel camera along with an LED flash, whereas on the Moto E you only have a 5 megapixel offering at the back with no LED flash whatsoever. Also, the front camera on the Moto E is of the VGA offering, whereas I think, if I remember correctly, the front camera on this phone is around 2 megapixel or maybe 1.2. I'm not too sure, but it is definitely better than the one on offer on the Moto E. So if you want to take a lot of photos and you want your photos to come up a bit decent, then I would say you should rather go for the Moto G 2014. Okay, in terms of core specs, I would say Moto E is surprisingly the more powerful offering, because it's released just recently as compared to the Moto G, which was released last year. This comes with a quad-core Snapdragon 400, which is of the older generation, and whereas the Moto E, this has the Snapdragon 410 64-bit low mid-range offering, which is obviously far much faster, better and efficient at battery life and performance both as compared to the Moto G. So if you want to go purely for specs, both phones have 1 gig of RAM, both have quad-core processor, but the Moto E has the 64-bit Snapdragon 410. So if you want to future-proof your phone and you want to make sure that future upgrades or updates do not slow your phone down, then I would say you should go for the Moto E. And because the Moto E has to move less pixels around as compared to the Moto G, so the Moto E in terms of performance is an absolute winner here. There's no question about it. Because in the Moto G you have an older generation of quad-core Snapdragon 400, and plus it has more pixels to move around, so it can sometimes get a bit sluggish here and there, whereas the Moto E, in my opinion, is a much faster phone as compared to the Moto G, because it has a 64-bit Snapdragon 410 quad-core processor. So in terms of raw specs and performance, I would say that Moto E is my pick, because it has less pixels to move, better processor, and also better overall performance as well. Okay, so they both have SD card expansion. I think they both have SD card expansion up to 32 gig if I remember correctly in both. And also the internal memory on the Moto G, I think, is 8 gig. Yes, it is, and if I remember it now. And I think out of the 8 gigs you have around 4.5 gig available, same as on the Moto E as well. You have 8 gig of internal memory and about 4.5 gig of user memory available free to install your apps and stuff. So in terms of memory, they're both pretty much the same. In terms of battery life, I would say the Moto E is still again a winner, because this phone has a 2390 milliampere battery as compared to the 2070 offering on the Moto G. Even though the Moto G can last you very easily one day. If you haven't checked the Moto G battery life video on Lollipop, please do check it out. It's on my channel, and this phone is still well capable of lasting you for the whole day. But the Moto E can last you even more than a day, because it's got a bigger battery, it's got a lower powered screen to power up as well, and also it has a better, more efficient Snapdragon 410 processor, which is far much better in performance and battery both, and this battery should last you even more than a day with heavy to moderate use. So guys, all in all, I think both phones are excellent offerings from Motorola. If you, like I said, are a person who likes to have a better camera and bigger screen, I would say, and better speakers, then you should go for the Moto G 2014. And by the way, I forgot to tell you, this is also a dual SIM version, the Moto G 2014. So if you also have two SIMs and you want to put both, use both the SIM slots, then I would say you should also go for the Moto G, whereas the Moto E is only got one SIM in it. I'm pretty sure they have either released or they're going to be releasing the dual SIM version very soon as well. But at the moment, as of now, I'm not too sure if they have that on the market. But this version, which is widely available, the 4G LTE version, this is only single SIM version. So all in all, I think if you want a dual SIM phone with a bigger screen, better screen as well, and dual front-facing stereo speakers along with a better camera, then you should go for the Moto G. But if you want the state-of-the-art, latest budget specs with the Snapdragon 410, 1 gig of RAM, and you don't mind much about the camera, but you do care about hardcore specs and performance, and you can compromise a bit on the screen resolution as well, then I would say that Moto E is definitely the choice. And also it has 4G LTE at a ridiculously cheap price. This phone unfortunately is 3G, so if you want 4G LTE, latest hardware and software, then I would say you should go for the Moto E. So guys, both phones have their pros and cons. In the end of the day, it's your personal preference, whatever you want to pick, and I will leave that for you to decide. If you got any questions, please leave them in the comment section, and if you haven't subscribed, please do so. And also if you would like to subscribe to my channel, please do so, as it helps the channel. Alright guys, so I'll see you in the next video.